The saga of Stranger Things started a whole 3 years ago already, in July 15th of 2016, and since then I have been an avid fan watching each series go through. I joined a little bit later than most, starting in September of 2016, but either way I've been following this story for months and months now. And even though we're really only at the halfway mark with Season 3, I have been dying to actually see this come on screen, and over the last week I have slowly been absorbing it into my processed brain. I would have loved to have binge watched it on day one, but I was just simply too busy to do that. So now that I have finally consumed all 8 hours of content, I figured I'd like to explain some of my thoughts and feelings about it all, even though it's a little bit later than most people. Because honestly, I was a little bit skeptical about Season 3. Season 1 was this wonderful boot of something new with its 80s vibes and its genuine, old-style, nostalgic horror sense. And when Season 2 came about, I became a little bit more skeptical. It did do a lot of good choices in expanding in several directions, but it also made some choices I wasn't so much a fan of, and many people made their thoughts very clear about it. So when Season 3 came along, I was a little bit on the fence, knowing that the series of Stranger Things could be something absolutely amazing in terms of writing and concepts and general exploration of its themes, but it can also possibly fall flat on its face, much like it kinda did in Season 2 in a handful of places. Now, if you haven't seen Stranger Things Season 3, I highly suggest you do so, because we're basically going to talk about spoiler territory right off the bat. The spike bat that never appeared in this season. So my thought on Stranger Things Season 3 is that it's kinda amazing. I honestly really enjoyed this season. I love the way that it expanded in all sorts of new territories. I liked the new characters they introduced, and I liked the new concepts that they explored it. I have heard many people kind of dashing this season a little bit down, but honestly, I didn't feel many of the issues people had, and I just generally had a really nice time. Maybe it's because I can literally switch off and enjoy a series if I want to, but either way, I really enjoyed it. However, I do have several different adjectives for this series, and I'm going to go through it in this video. The first one being that Stranger Things Season 3 is kinda chaotic. There is a large ensemble cast in this series, and it's getting progressively bigger every single time. I mean, we started the first season with 5 kids, 3 teenagers and 2 adults, and it's literally just only expanded from every different generation from there. Despite that though, I really loved many of the directions that many of these characters have taken. Billy, for example, had a bit of a harsh time in Season 2, not being too much of a liked character both in concept and in writing, but this time around he's had a much better fare. There are some great moments of acting from Dacre Montgomery, especially with that one scene where he's being possessed talking and you can see a tear come out of his eye as if it's literally Billy on the inside being afraid of all that's going on. He had a great new character arc with actually being the supernatural villain rather than just a human one, and I loved the twist with him and Mrs. Wheeler being that it doesn't actually go anywhere. I love the idea that Mrs. Wheeler doesn't go with it, and naturally Billy doesn't go with it either because he's got bigger, darker things to deal with, and I like that it just kind of dropped there because it didn't matter to either of their lives from that point onwards. Not to mention he had a great redemption at the end of the series with a bit of a heartbreaking final line. The only thing I could have really wanted more for the character was more payoff from the father. Like maybe what if he possessed his father and blomped him into the 30-body killing mind flayer thing. Mike, almost main kid protagonist number 1, kind of, not really, he's losing his stature a little bit. He's annoying and overprotective throughout the whole season, but it's also fairly fitting with normal people. We are flawed as people, and I can see him being that overprotective person over his first girlfriend, not to mention she is kind of supernatural and being worked like a machine, and he's annoying because he's a teenager. I wish he wasn't annoying, and I wish he wasn't being so snarky to Hopper, but he's a normal person. Elle was great. I loved the coming of age arc that she had with Max actually learning to be a bit of a girl and hanging out with a girl for once, and the idea of her being used like a machine is something that kind of makes logical progression sense, and she is using her powers more and more as they get more powerful. She also has a lot of suffering this season, which, you know, I mean, it adds some spice. Everyone needs a worm in their car for some good character development, and it's an interesting ending for her character, losing her superpowers. It kind of lines up fairly simply, but in all, I really like the direction she's going in. She's not just a one-hit character. Will really gets the shaft this season, almost feeling alone in his own crowd. The The destroying of Castle Byers was heartbreaking, and I have a feeling that's going to come up more as a thing later on. But then after that, when the squad suddenly doesn't matter about their relationship issues, he just became the Mind Flayer Raider, which is an odd change, but I guess it passes. You'd think he'd be more freaked out, but I guess he'd have to mature from how much he's constantly being involved in the whole thing. I like him as a character. I wish they could have done more with him, but the fact that they didn't also kind of lines up with his character, kind of being shafted to the side by his own friends. Dustin was a fantastic little guy. Strange that he was dumb last season, and now he's like more of a smart genius this time, mostly. It was a little heartbreaking to have him split from the rest of the squad, but hey, it happens each season. Season 1 was Will, Season 2 was Al, and this season's Dustin. Steve is great as usual. He never seemed more like a loser than this season, but hey, he finally won a fight. Oddly enough, against the worst odds so far. Robin was a great new addition. She was mostly the sarcastic add-on with actual intelligence, but she was fun to see. And the LGBT part passes. I was initially disappointed by the reveal because it's kind of your standard, whoops, no, I'm gay, you were twisted, whoa, ha ha ha. But the response of Steve just kind of dealing with it and just acting completely the same afterwards was much better than previous versions of gay representation. Not to mention, it doesn't become a major point of her character. It's not part of her arc or her story. It's just there as a tiny little twist on Steve's romantic interests. It's about as good as they could probably do, considering they already mastered the subtlety with Will's sexuality. Erica I enjoyed. She was a fun, sassy character, and it was funny to see the nerd realization from her, but I initially found her and her ice cream part annoying, and she can be overall seen as pretty annoying. Not to mention, she's kind of like a stereotypical typecast. Hopefully there'll be better development for the next season, because otherwise she's just kind of a stereotype. Nancy was depressing to see working at Hawkins. There was a cool mini sexism storyline, though far more interesting was the actual investigations, mostly because you're trying to piece everything together, and she had some great moments, though they never got that big newspaper payoff, personally, unless that was them, but I feel like it wasn't, which was a bit of a shame. She didn't get her full redemption. Jonathan was a bit more sidelined. He was just kind of following along with Nancy for the most part. The argument fairly makes sense between the two of them and their different views, and he does his best, but he's usually overshadowed by Elle later on, like saving her in the hospital when she's trapped in a room, or trying to cut out the worm from Elle's leg. John just kind of gets thrown off to the side. Murray, I love Murray. It's funny to see the same lovers quarrel spiel come out, and I love his character development, starting out as this conspiracy Russian hater to having an actual Russian friend. He's also great with kids, which is lovely to see. The last we see is him being found by the military. I kind of want more than that. I wanted more of an ending for him, but I guess he just sort of huddles away to another house somewhere. Alexei, though, stole the show. He was so docile and heartwarming. He was fun to see in any scene, and hey, he humanized the Russians, which is kind of rare in a Russians are evil kind of storyline, I think. Though it would have kind of been cool if he was still evil, if there was an evil twist that he was literally just emotionally manipulating everyone. But the death flags were raised, he wanted to be an American citizen, he almost got everything he wanted, and his death was heartbreaking. I mean, it was the most heartbreaking one, I would probably say. But then, of course, there is Hopper, and I didn't enjoy him. Being irked by Elle's relationship is understandable, but he became such a caricature of that concept. He was so over the top, and it didn't make much of a realistic sense. He was so angry about it. He followed along with Joyce very grumpily, and he only got involved and more angry since being jumped by Grigory the Russian. He was always unhinged, which maybe would be more plausible later on, I can kind of see that, but starting at 100 miles an hour just kind of irked me the wrong way. His supposed death was great though he's definitely not dead. Also, I recently made my own Instagram page. If you want to see more of what I'm doing in real life, consider following me there, or if you're a new viewer, consider subscribing. And then finally, the Russians. I liked them. Some people said they were kind of like a cartoony villain, but the Russians aren't new. They were a constant theme of the 80s, and they've been hinted from season 1. It seemed like a natural expansion to me, and it made fair sense. They were hidden under the mall through corruption deals and under-the-table work. It was a bit ironic that Steve won a fight against a Russian and not normal people, but they were probably scientists rather than soldiers for the most part. Grigory was horrifyingly great as a Terminator. His emotionless, almost invincible soldier spiel was great, and I really loved it. It was a bit cartoony there, but it kind of makes sense. He's a soldier, he's hardened, he doesn't have many emotions. Generally, I liked the direction that many of the characters went. Many were very natural, they went to places you would kind of expect to see for those kind of characters, and it was good to see how they all meshed together. Can't wait for them all to be shuffled again to see new connections next season. But something else very major that I would like to point out is that I felt that Stranger Things 3 is kinda cool as well. It had some really cool concepts and reimaginings for the series. The number one thing being the new monster. He's kind of the new monster anyway. I love the sludge element of this new monster. He was easily one of the scariest and grossest that we've seen so far, and I've loved the entire hospital sequence. Because in the first season, the Demogorgon was scary, mostly because we didn't see much of who he was or what he was doing. Now we know what he looks like, he's a little less scary. But then season 2 gave us the Demo Dogs, which are scary because they're fast, but other than that, there wasn't really too much to it. And the Mind Flayer, though being this horrifying, gigantic creature, was just kind of made out of gas, and it was hard to sort of find him as a plausible monster. This time, having him actually be around in the flesh, literally just made by flesh, was really great to see. And like, as I said before, that hospital sequence was great. The fact that you can have him trapped behind a door and he just melts down and slides under the door, it just perfect horror that I just loved so much, and it was cool to see a more plausible Mind Flayer as well. And it was interesting to see how it worked with the humans, how it could possess them and make them fall into the sludge. And I loved how it slowly grew over the season as it collected more and more bodies. The mall was also a great homage to the 80s. It was a wonderful set, it was lovely to see considering I've never actually lived in the 80s before, and it was genuinely terrifying with the Mind Flayer crashing into it and all the lights flickering like crazy. The Russian area was also a cool, unauthorized little adventure set, very Goonies and that kind of thing. Though I do agree with Steve about the whole fire safety thing. It was kind of in the back of my mind as being a foreshadowing hint, and maybe it was, considering the mall actually burned down, but who knows. The sexism element was cool to see as a little concept, though maybe a little heavy-handed, I'm not sure. Especially how the actual sexist people just kept saying Nancy Drew when they were possessed by the monster, because the monster wouldn't be saying that about Nancy Drew. The monster's more caring about Elle. So I don't really know what was going on there. I mean, maybe it was to the hint of, you know, the Nancy Drew reference, but nah. The element of the kids growing up was really heartbreaking to see, but it's a natural progression too. It'll be interesting to see how it continues with the main squad, since this was just kind of brushed over once the actual part of hell broke loose. And the concept of the fair and July 4th was an awesome new location and setting. And the summer season for a nice change of pace. It was great to see. Generally, I liked the new concepts they introduced, and it was just a nice lot of new, nice, fresh fun. But then, there's a few other things, cause Stranger Things 3 is kind of forgetful. There were several little details with very little payoff. In season 1, there was a lot of elements of trying to piece the details together yourself, but this time it was kind of the same thing, but less obvious, I think. For example, the blackout that took down all of the mall. This, you can assume now that you've seen it, was because that was when the machine was first turned on and actually started succeeding. The battery that Dustin finds in the back room of the mall that's supposed to be this green acid thing, is just a battery for the machine, but I was expecting to see more from it, like using the acid to break through something or to attack someone with it. It's just some strange energy from Promethium, I think, element, something like that. The rats wasn't entirely explained. You can work it out later in that they're just running to the source and they don't actually explode. It's literally just them dropping into flesh like the humans do to build up the Mind Flayer. He had to start from a very small place. Which also makes sense actually why the portal that he appears from is just kind of wind, because the Mind Flayer was just wind, but then he becomes actually fleshy, I guess. The magnets falling off of Joyce's fridge, they are because of the whole electromagnetic change, which I think also happens related to the machine. Does it? Because it happens twice, doesn't it? So does that click at 2 different moments? Something like that. Like, you can kind of see where that's going, and that there was a big machine, so it just did it at some point. I believe there was also a shot where the sludge monster sludges away, and it leaves a single bone behind. But then nothing ever happens of it. Is it just to say that it's made of flesh, but that one bone couldn't get taken away? Is that something that's hinted at, like, later? It's like, this bone is the thing that keeps the Mind Flayer alive. I don't know. And then there was also, at the very end, when we're seeing the conspiracy news, we hear about chemical waste dumping into the town, which wasn't an overt thing in the entire season, and was just shown as a little, what if this was part of the problem from the news thing? So maybe this is something else that will either pop up in the next season, which makes more sense considering it's at the end of the season, or it's just a little thing that I missed. because the chemical waste could have just been them dumping the batteries away or something. I don't know. Many of these kind of elements, I guess the payoff is working it out yourself on a second run through, but even still, it felt like Stranger Things 3 was kind of flawed in places. It had a couple issues. There was these payoff issues, including also Nancy not getting the big newspaper reveal that she wanted. Generally, all of life seemed to stop when the monster actually came back, and they never finished their actual life problems when they stopped afterwards. But I mean, I guess that's kind of natural anyway. But then also, some people complained of pacing errors. The first few episodes were a lot slower than the last ones. It's always the way with Stranger Things that the final, like, 3-4 episodes are the real golden stuff. And it makes sense to me. I personally just enjoyed seeing the world slowly expand at the beginning, but some people didn't like that. Another one that's a bit more hard to ignore is some tonal issues. Because Stranger Things tries to balance this whole horror element to the nice, happy nostalgia of being a child in the 80s, and there are times when it kind of mishmashes. The most obvious one is the Dustin and Susie payoff with them singing a song during the climax of the Mind Flayer. I really liked the song and I really liked the moment, but I definitely didn't feel it fit. I felt constantly just kind of on edge after seeing like the Mind Flayer flying along. It was nice to see, and I guess it makes sense that it timed then, but it also went on a little bit long, and it's one of those things where it sort of missed the mark. It passes, but it could do with some tweaks. Stranger Things 3 certainly isn't the perfect season, and it does have some pretty big issues like that. But generally, I also found Stranger Things 3 to be kinda heartbreaking as well. The ending of it was just completely decimating. Obviously, the big ending point is the fact that Hopper is missing. We assume he's dead, but there are many hints to say that he is not. For example, in one of the prior episodes, Hopper says all of Murray's entire number, and if you call that, you will get a message from Murray basically saying, "I've got some news, Joyce. It's not good news or bad news, but I've got some news," which could hint to something else. We never see Hopper's body when he's actually being destroyed and exploded. We see the Russians explode, but not Hopper. In the final shot of the machine, when you can see the platform Hopper would be on, he's not there. In the post-credits scene, we see the Russians in a prison, referencing an American. David Harbour is actually growing out a beard as if he has been on the run or is in prison, being all bearded out and not being able to shave. The same music that plays when Will's fake body is found in Season 1 is the same one that happens during that moment. When the military barge into the Russian lab downstairs, all the Russians are missing by the time that they arrive. I guess they've also gone into some kind of portal, or I don't know, they were all killed by the machine. And then finally, as a sort of more of a narrative hint, Elle has lost her superpowers, so she cannot physically go and search for Hopper to confirm that theory herself. It all lines up to suggest that he is still out there in some form, just like Elle was at the end of Season 1. Other noteworthy things at the ending is the Russians have now imprisoned an American, not necessarily Hopper, it could also be Dr. Brenner, since we know he has survived, according to the Duffer Brothers, and that they own a Demogorgon, trying to weaponize it. Elle has lost her superpowers still, even after 3 months after the events, and moves away with the buyers, most likely because Joyce actually knows the whole scenario, whereas the Wheelers clearly don't. Steve and Robin have gotten a new job at Family Video, alongside that wonderful guy from the arcade, whose name I never knew. The shopping mall was burned down and probably discontinued. The mayor was disgraced. The town has 30 new dead civilians, the military has stormed in, cover-ups have been noted and are kind of making conspiracy news, and there was some kind of chemical leak. Murray was found by the US Army, and that's the last you hear of him. The gate is open 3 inches, kind of. When the military come in, you can see there is still a tiny little glow, and narratively it makes sense if Hopper's there that they left it open for 3 inches. The little sister Erica gets D&D, and Castle Byers is destroyed. Generally though, there are many loose ends and plenty of stuff to talk about, all to suggest that Stranger Things is just kinda growing. There's many different elements to explore in Season 4. Most of the loose ends I've already just mentioned from there, but another one you might have forgotten is the fact that the Russians still know Dustin's full name. There's a chance that everyone who knew is now dead from the machine or whatever. If they did manage to get back to Russia, then Dustin might be in some trouble, or maybe his mum will be. Some elements that they could explore for Season 4 though could include the idea that Hopper is either missing out in the Upside Down or in Russia. Either way, he would have that beard that he's been growing. The Russians are going to continue to try to train a Demogorgon, or perhaps will be overrun by them. Mr. Brenner will make a reappearance in Russia, which also explains their knowledge of how they know to go to Hawkins or to attempt in the US, how they know that there was an opening in Hawkins before. Steve and Robin will still be at Family Video doing some weird shenanigans. Maybe the arcade guy will become more of a common character, I don't know. Byers and Elle will return for Thanksgiving/Christmas time, probably in 1986 by that point, and Elle is going to rediscover her powers to slowly discover and find Hopper. Perhaps this could be linked to that final payoff of love being the thing that strengthens her powers, as opposed to the idea that she was given that hate is the most powerful power she can get from the most hated episode from Season 2. That still hasn't had its full payoff that we'll see Elle at her full strength when she learns the power of love. Generally, there are a lot of new expansions for Season 3, and I thoroughly enjoyed all of the details throughout this one. I'm not sure if I would say that this season is better than Season 1, considering Season 1 was a perfect, simple little package, but Season 3, I would say, is definitely better than Season 2. I just love the way it expanded all its concepts, I loved the monster, I loved the direction of most of the characters, and I love where it seems to be going next time. I am thoroughly invested, and I guess I'm going to have to wait another year and a half for any kind of Stranger Things details. But either way, I had a thoroughly enjoyable time watching Stranger Things Season 3, and I can't wait for whenever it's going to be for Stranger Things Season 4. Do let me know your thoughts on Stranger Things and how long you've been following it. Do you have any ideas of what's going to happen in Season 4, or what you think's going on with some theories? What's going on with Hopper and the Russians? And I mean, that's really all there is to talk about. Generally. What were your thoughts on the whole new Coke advertisements? I personally really hated them, and it kept taking me out of the immersion. I hated all the Coke product placement, but hey, what can you do? I think I've been rambling very much long enough, so I think I'm going to end it off here. If you like my stuff, then do consider subscribing or following me on the several links that we show up in a minute, but for now, my name's been Dazz, you didn't really care, and I'll see you in a bit.